Right, good afternoon everyone. My name's Fraser Hamilton from M40 Offices. We develop and operate serviced offices in Oxfordshire for small businesses of 2 to 10 people. I've been asked to come to you today to explain my experiences of having installed solar PV at our premises at Telford Road, which I'm very happy to do. The first point I was asked to address was what encouraged me to actually do this. How do you do this? Right. Is that right? So, yeah, why? What encouraged us to do it? Why put solar PV in? If we're totally honest, without the feed-in tariff, it probably wouldn't have worked financially for us. We are a profit-making organisation, and would like to continue to be so. At the moment, these things aren't massively cheap to put in. As you heard before, the 50 kilowatt system that we put in costs in the order of £100,000. Slightly over, but near as damn it. The reasons we initially started, I'm going to just put these other two headings on. We all know that we have to address climate change. I think that's a given now. And the corporate social responsibility, that worked two ways for us. One for us as a business, and secondly for our tenants. They were able to say, hands up, 80% of the electricity that we now consume is from a renewable source. So we took a view that gave us a unique selling point in Bicester, where I believe the first business centre to be providing renewable energy to our tenants. But going back to it, the feed-in tariff is absolutely fundamental to making it work commercially at the moment. We are, I'm just looking at this, our feed-in tariff is 32.9 pence per unit that we generate. So, there we go. Right, so enabling qualification, I'll bring these all up. I think these have been touched on before. You've got to have a structurally sound roof. There's no point in putting the panels on something that's not structurally sound. The network, distribution network operator, you have to have a certain sort of connection, and you do need planning permission, as we've just heard in Bicester. We didn't have any problem with those. I brought along the chap whose company installed it, who's going to sort of expand a little bit on what I'm saying, because I'm just talking from my experiences, but there are other options that he's just going to briefly run through you. But I have to say, the company came in, did the survey, did the planning application, did everything from start to finish, and for me as an operator, I've got a business to operate. I don't want to be filling in zillions of forms and all that sort of thing. So it actually made it a very painless procedure in its entirety. As I said, we have a 50 kilowatt peak system. Working on the tables and things that you've been shown, which is the way that we always operate, we calculated with the aid of our installer that our investment return would be about 8 to 9 years. Having said that, the figures that you have to use are conservative. We've been operating just about a month now, and we've generated over 3,600 kilowatt hours, which at 32.9 pence is just under 1,200 quid's worth. That's in feed-in tariff. On top of that, our saving year on year on our bill was about 670 quid, and then there's a lot of bits and pieces that are fed back. So it's actually shortly under 7 years that it's working out at. Where are we? Oh, I was going to say, one thing that hasn't been touched on here is that, while a lot of people will bulk at £100,000 as being an initial investment, one thing that hasn't been touched and is rarely talked about is that there are financing packages available from Siemens and the Carbon Trust. which my company took advantage of. We don't have 100,000 quid of spare cash floating around. And so I contacted the Siemens Trust, girl there, Mary Tiller, extremely helpful, took me through the whole process, provided certain information. It went to the Carbon Trust. All they do is check that, yeah, you're going to make the savings and it can pay for itself and it makes commercial sense. You've got a non-recourse loan, pays for itself. So I've got a situation now where, yep, I've got the installation in there. It's completely paying for itself. It'll pay itself off in under 7 years, and then everything I make therein is up to me. So it's a bit of a no-brainer. So consequently, I'm looking at doing it at my other 2 sites. Going back to planning it, we have the enabling qualifications, which we have already touched on: the roof, the planning, and what was the other one? I don't remember. We've been there anyway. Experienced designers, goes without saying, there's no point in getting amateurs to do it. And as has already been touched on, they've got to be qualified people, because if they're not qualified people, you will not get a feed-in tariff. So you have to use a qualified person. I think, is that what? I'm going to hand over to Max now, because he's going to tell you a bit more about other bits and pieces, I think.
Okay, large-scale solar is all we're doing. We are not in the domestic scene at all. And by large scale, we mean 50 kilowatts and above. That's not as large scale as we'd like, because some of the earlier installations we were doing were several hundred kilowatts, and even down to one locally here, relatively locally, is one at Kidlington, which was 5 megawatts. However, the success of solar and its uptake by the general population and specialist areas as well, specialist commercial and industrial concerns, has been such that the government have had to reform and reshape the whole tariff structure before there was a runaway of cash going in the wrong pocket, or so they thought. We now, in today's climate, only are tackling 50 kilowatt roofs. Nothing extra, nothing different. All 50 kilowatt roofs. And we start off with the usual procedure, which is down on there. Can you press that down? You've seen this before. You don't get a lot of sun up in John O'Groats, you get a lot more down in Cornwall. So your radiation across the country varies, as does in fact the number of daylight hours you get. As you move further north, you get less daylight, let alone different temperatures as well. So if you're really planning to maximise your return, a business you'd set up in probably Land's End. But there's no business to be had down there. So we all start in the same sort of area. But here we are. Sorry, could you possibly manage that? I can't quite see it. So large-scale solar is now defined as 50 kilowatts, not as large as it was. You could, however, go forward with a 50 and beyond, but the tariffs do not work and provide enough cash to make an economically sound decision. And Fraser's already mentioned that, where we've seen that anything at the moment beyond 50 does not make economic sense, except in one very small area of using a different type of panel. We can go up as far as 150 kilowatts on a single installation, and we're doing that now at Mealy in Abingdon, if you know where that is, the Mealy building in Abingdon. What we have done is decided that we will go just on existing roofs, but more importantly, on designer roofs. And we're designing the roofs on which we put the panels, and not simply designing a house and putting panels on. We have got on existing roofs, that's easy enough, existing commercial concerns, you've seen one from Fraser. We have designed a solar barn, which in fact is shifting the ground above up onto the roof, and those barns are designed specifically for a 50 kilowatt installation at maximum return for the investment that's being made. So we can apply a lot of the original calculations which are used on a 50 kilowatt roof, but this time when you have a solar barn, we provide a free barn. The agricultural communities love that, of course. So they can have a barn and they can have the solar on top, but in order to pay for the barn, we take the feed-in tariff and give the farmer or the farm facilities enough power from the array equivalent to 1 times the unit of the maximum size of electricity take, which in this case is 50 kilowatt peak. Does that work? Yes, it does. It's going to produce a return on a typical £100,000 investment, which now includes a barn, I might add, a barn as well. And it's fairly substantial. It's in old-fashioned numbers, it's 300 feet long. 100 feet long, 100 feet long and 30 feet wide. And that's tilted to the maximum angle in terms of azimuth and in terms of orientation to maximize again the output from the array. So this seems to be the way that solar's going. And we now have nearly 100 of these things on our books at the moment and seemingly growing by the day, which is alarming in some respects, but good in another. So we have also got solar parks, which I've just mentioned too as well, apart from solar barns. We are also providing arrays at a fixed level above car parking areas. The first three are going to go in around the ring road of Oxford, where we're using the park and rides to establish an array which is large enough to make economic sense for you now to drive up in your Nissan Leaf or whatever car you're going to have, your electric car you're going to have probably, and plug it straight into the solar array. That seems to be meeting with a lot of favour at the moment, and we've got a lot of orders and interests in that. Enabling qualifications, well, we've almost done that to death, I guess. You've got to have all the good things, the right amount of sun, the right amount of location, the right orientation, and so on. But now, when you're starting to talk about hundreds of thousands of pounds, and we have that in a number of areas already where we have group schemes, you've got to have to get either yourself to insure it, if you're lucky enough to have a few £100,000 in your back pocket, or you have the rooftop lease. This brings into account a whole different set of conditions you must meet, which are determined by the investor group. This is at the moment standing at about £100 million in the UK's worth of rooftop leases, and I would think in the next 4 to 5 months we'll see that number double quite easily. With that comes the need to obviously choose your right module, the official name for a panel. And what you're finding, again, is looking at efficiencies, which are, we're now going to gallium cyanide panels and so on, which are better at producing more electricity in the same amount of space. Clearly, you're going to have to do inverters, but you're going to have clever inverters today, not some of the old rather clunky stuff. You want modern stuff, which in fact has a high efficiency of conversion. Mounting system, all important, so you don't damage roofs if it's an existing roof, and certainly it needs to be flexible so you can build it into your new installation as you go forward on a designer roof. So all this thing is where we're heading, project development. All of that now needs more than just panels on roofs. You need a lot more, apart from, of course, the service of the support of the fit. You require these other elements which now extend the capability or the required capability of a solar company. We now have legals to deal with, which are quite complex, and they all seem to be different. The lawyers win hands down here, I'm afraid. You're going to have direct agreements with some of the importing agencies in order to get the prices down. You're going to have to be spending, as a relatively small company, maybe £500,000 on a job, where you have multiple roofs of 50 kilowatt in places such as industrial parks, commercial premises and so on. And in science parks, so you can go on. And wait for it in golf ranges. And you can go on and on and on. But now it's a very expensive business to set up. And to get into that, get over the hump of the smaller installations, which are not wouldn't expose us as a company, to move into the bigger scale is quite a big leap. We do need the support of FIT.